Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, there you go. Good afternoon. And welcome. Welcome all. Trustees, faculty, students, staff, and friends of CTS. Welcome. And welcome to the second CTS Talk of the year. For those who may not know me, I am Francisco Lozada Jr., Vice President for Faculty Affairs and Dean of the Faculty here at CTS. This year, we are featuring 4 nationally known speakers who will help us explore crucial intersections between theology and sexuality, theology and behavior, health, theology and childhood development, and religion and society. And in a time of deep political and cultural distress, these conversations are vital for helping faith communities engage complex issues of identity, mental health, and social responsibility with compassion and understanding. As such, today's CTS talk focuses on mental health, systems, and wellness. Undergirding every presentation is CTS's belief that every person is created in the image of God. One of the outcomes of this belief, as it relates to today's presentation, is that our physical and mental existence, along with our multiple identity formations, are understood as gifts from the Creator. What this belief also means is that every person we meet or engage with today is an opportunity to get to know the divine better. As the gospel of Jesus crosses borders, so can we. So we encourage you to join us in the reception afterwards in the lobby and introduce yourself to another person you have never met before. At each of our talks, we follow a similar format. After the initial presentation, our speaker will engage the assembly in a Q&A session. We will have someone in the aisles with a microphone, hopefully. After the Q&A, we really hope that you will join us for the reception outside Shelton in the lobby. Our presenter, Reverend Dr. Christina Jones-Davis, is Assistant Professor of Pastoral Theology and Marriage and Family Therapy here at CTS. It is my honor as Dean to introduce Dr. Davis, a member of the CTS faculty, whose influence at CTS reaches far beyond the classroom. You have her bio on the back of the card you hold, so I will try not to repeat too much. What distinguishes Dr. Davis isn't only her scholarship or her professional accomplishments, though those are considerable. It's the way she inhabits her work. She brings a deep, steady compassion to every conversation, a gift for seeing both the person and the potential in front of her. In meetings, she's the voice that slows us down to ask the deeper questions. In the classroom, she's the one who draws out courage in her students to think critically, to speak honestly, and to lead with integrity. And in every corner of this institution here at CTS, she carries an unmistakable calm, rooted, gracious, and wise. Dr. Davis reminds us that teaching and counseling are not just about what we do, but how we do it, with presence, humility, and conviction. Finally, what is not on the back of this card is that Dr. Davis is from the great state of Houston, Texas, home of great diversity, inclusion, and equity. Not to mention barbecue and oil. She did her bachelor's degree at Emory University in sociology with a concentration in psychology and holds a THD in pastoral care and counseling from Candler School of Theology at Emory. She holds several clinical licenses from various states and has been with CTS since 2014. We are delighted to have one of our own sharing her expertise with us today. Friends, please join me in welcoming Dr. Davis to the stage.
Thank you so much, Dean Lozada, for that wonderful introduction and welcome. Thank you, David, for this opportunity to speak. When President Malat asked several months ago, I was so excited for the opportunity. I appreciate that trust to stand before you today. Thank you all for being here to share some time. And so, I'd like to talk a little bit this afternoon about some of the things that I've been kind of reflecting on as it relates to care. And so I'm reminded of when I was growing up in Houston, Texas, and I had a neighbor. Her name was Mrs. Ortega. And Mrs. Ortega planted a small baby lemon tree in between this small patch of gravel in between our two sidewalks, right where our driveways were. And I remember thinking to myself, even then, that this is a lost cause. The space was too narrow, too dry, the Houston heat too harsh, and yet she would be out there. She would be tending to it, watering it, caring for it. Until one day, her granddaughter, my friend, Cynthia, and I were walking home from school, and we saw Mrs. Ortega standing underneath the branches of this tree. And there we joined her. We would talk about our days, and we were all shielded from the sun. And so I think about that tree, I think about Miss Ortega, and I ask kind of what was it that she was really planting? And what is it that helps people to reach out and cultivate life anyway, against all odds? What do we call that? And so I have to turn to my ancestors in moments like these when I'm looking for how to understand what to name these things. And so I look to one of the ancestors. Thank you. Does that turn it on? Got it. Thank you so much. And so one of the ancestors, Martin Luther King Jr., talked about something called creative maladjustment. He often talked about this phrase and used it, but the time in which he used it that I was most interested in was when he did the 75th annual address to the American Psychological Association. And it was there where I was thinking, wow, what is this message about creative maladjustment, and what were the things that were going on during that time that made it something that he returned back to again and again? I had to look no further than to King's right to get some clues to this, where you will see standing next to him Dr. Kenneth Clark. And so for those who may not know, Dr. Kenneth Clark and his wife, Dr. Mamie Clark, were known for their famous doll study. This was the study that changed the outcome of the Brown versus Board of Education, that deemed that separate was not equal. And it was also the study where they discovered that the youngest among us had already internalized, and we're talking preschool age and elementary school age, associations of brown skin that were negative and attributing positive characteristics to dolls with white skin. This was the context that King was speaking in when he was talking about creative maladjustment. What else was going on? This was September 1st, 1967. It was the summer that journalists and historians call the long, hot summer, because it was marked by a boiling over of civil unrest resulting from long-standing inequalities. With this context in mind, we can listen to the words that King spoke, and I wanted to read them verbatim. He said, "Modern psychology has a word that is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It is the word maladjusted. And certainly, we all want to avoid the maladjusted life. But I must honestly say that there are some things in our nation and in our world to which I am proud to be maladjusted. I never intend to adjust myself to segregation and discrimination. I never intend to become adjusted to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions where we take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few, leaving millions of people smothering in an airtight cage of poverty amidst an affluent society. I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism and the self-defeating effects of physical violence. We need maladjusted men and women where these problems are concerned." And what are some of the problems that we face today? When we consider over 41 million children and families that are going without the food assistance needed to survive, we need not adjust. When we consider that there are more civilian-owned firearms in this country than we have people, we need not adjust. And that these same firearms are the leading cause of death of youth right now, today. When we consider that there are millions who do not have adequate access to health care, and that rising premiums only threaten to worsen this situation, we need not adjust. And so what do we do today with these tectonic-sized cracks underneath and all around? Because we know, right, and I'm always concerned with, as a systemically minded therapist, when systems are doing well, right? There's no perfect system, but when they're doing healthier, we can kind of feel the difference, right? We know that trust goes up, we feel more safe, we feel like we can show up perhaps more authentically and kind of be in relation with one another in particular ways. And fear has an easy access to off-ramp, right? It doesn't take over. But conversely, when systems are less safe, we trust less and fear can easily consume. And so if you ask me, as a systemic trauma-informed therapist, what kind of system are we in now and how are we doing? One of the ways that we illustrate this is through the question, can you swim? What's the response? My response is it depends. It depends, right? What kind of waters are we talking about? Because if we're talking about shallow waters where you could feel the ground beneath your feet, you feel safe and secure and maybe even playful like this guy, right? You've got all of your materials and your floating devices. Then perhaps, yes, you can say with confidence, right? I've got 4 feet of water. I can swim. I've got skills, right? But what if these are the waters? What if you're trying to swim in a 12-foot storm? In which case, it becomes very difficult to feel the ground beneath your feet, to feel secure, to feel safe, and to access those same skills that you had in 4 feet of calm water. And so, friends, what kinds of waters are around us today? How high are those waves? How loud are the crashes? How dark does it seem? I write about in a forthcoming edited volume entitled Alternative Attitudes Towards Suicide and its Survivors about trauma and the trauma revolution, which I trace back to 1998, where SAMHSA issued a set of guidelines, essentially, that helped healthcare providers become and be trauma-informed in the care that they were providing. And while this was really, really important, what we know about trauma these days is that it's not just in the sector of healthcare, it's not just about treating war veterans or folks who are survivors of abuse, that it's more ubiquitous than that. And that really all of us, on some level, are always scanning for information to answer the question, am I safe? We all need to know this, right? And when we sense and feel and notice something in our surround or internally that communicates that we're not, or reminds us of a time we were not, our bodies will go into survival and protection, as they should, right? And so those kinds of reactions are about helping us to survive, fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. And so Part of the trauma-informed care best practice is to, instead of ask what's wrong with a person, we ask and wonder, what happened? What happened? It's acknowledging that there may be this 12-foot raging storm that they're swimming within at that very moment. But as racial trauma expert Resma Minicum reminds us that things don't just happen to us individually. Oftentimes, they happen to us collectively. And so Minicum says it didn't just happen to you, it happened to your people. So, as a systems trauma-informed therapist, I ask, not what is wrong with us, but what is happening to us. In a world with such tectonic cracks, what keeps us from collapsing completely? When President Malat made this invitation, again, I knew that I was going to say something about collective care practices in collective assaults. And so I came up with this title as a working title, and of course I'm going to ask my friends because they're going to tell me the truth, and that's what I did. I said, hey, what about this title, We Got Us? And they asked an important follow-up question. They said, who is we? Like, who is the we that has the us? Who is we? And it was an important question that was worth following up. And so I said, let me consult the ancestors one more time. And I thought about Maya Angelou. And in her book, Mom and Me and Mom, Maya talks about her relationship with her mom, Vivian Baxter. And when young Maya was only 22 years old, her mother looked at her in the eye and said, "You are the greatest woman I have ever met." And there was something that Angelou spoke about as changing her and shifting her from the inside out, where that kind of love liberated her to go out into the world and to do bold and daring things and to show up in particular ways that she carried with her always. And so maybe part of the we is looking kind of inward for whose love are we carrying with us, past or present? Who is your Vivian Baxter? Could be a friend, a caregiver, a Sunday school teacher, a neighbor, right? For me, one of my Vivian Baxters is Laureen Jones. And this is my grandmother, and she's there kind of huddled within all of her great-grands. They couldn't even all fit in the picture in this photo. And so my late grandmother was the one who wore the fiercest hats on the west side of the Mississippi. She was lead alto and lead usher board chair, right? She did all these amazing things as a faithful member at the Mount Zion CME Church, which was established as a safe haven for Black families in rural East Texas in the late 1900s. She had her share of high waters that were torrential and that were choppy, but she somehow found a way to pass on care and warmth even in her dimpled smile and in the embrace of her beautifully self-manicured hands. That she was the one that could look across a sea of family members in which I had a long legacy of patriarchs who were preachers and pastors, and be looking for me to say, you pray. You lead the prayer. That was a love that liberated me, and that I continue to carry with me and receive support from still today. Who might your liberating love be sourced by? Because these are seemingly insignificant in some ways, but for me, they're like the relational equivalent of the butterfly effect, which for some who may not be familiar is what meteorologists describe as this capacity for a seemingly small, insignificant activity to happen in one place and set off a sequence of events that impacts the system in another place. For example, the butterfly can flap its wings in Brazil and set off a chain reaction that causes a tornado in Texas. This is the kind of systemic impact that relationships can have. We know that relationships are protective. We know that they are resilience building. We know that they are healing all at once. And one of the longest studies ever conducted of adult human development was done by Harvard, which validated, right, what we already know, that over 8 decades and counting, the number one predictor of health was relationships. Across all manner of variables, right? That was the common factor. Strong relationships. We also see testament of this in relationships that are not just blood ties, right? They are family of choice. They are community ties. They are even the kinds of interactions we have in coffee houses or with elevator mates. I know for those who are introverted like me, that might sound, right, like a stretch. But these kinds of interactions can build up and shore us up. And so one example in the study was those who had come back from war. They were war veterans, and they cited that in the most difficult times, it was relationships that helped them get through. And I think about a colleague who also named that he had a grandfather who was warm and kind and loving, and he never noticed that he developed any PTSD symptoms and was a World War II vet. And so he can only wonder, right, with all of the variables involved, what enabled him to do it? And he thought back and he said, my granddad was the same guy who gathered everybody to play cards at the end of really hard days. To play, to gather, to be in sync with each other, right? It wasn't a time where they had really the choice to doom scroll, right? There are certainly other ways that we can check out, but instead they gathered. And so we see that this is important. It's not only important, it's not only something we see in humans. The instinct to herd as a measure of shoring up vulnerabilities is something that we see in other creatures as well. They know that particularly in times of trouble, coming together matters. So what am I trying to say? Relationships are resistance. We resist through relationships, and perhaps resistances cannot be sustained without them. That relational work is justice work. And as I think about this, I think about how many places we see wisdom literature, right, testify that two together can put up a resistance. A strand of 3 cords is not easily broken. And even still that we know this, we are yet facing a loneliness pandemic, where adults are gathering a third of the time less than what we did just 10 years ago, where youth are spending 50% less time in person than they did just 10 years ago. And this was data that was released in 2020, i.e. before the pandemic, so I would imagine those numbers have only grown. And we don't often think about this as a crisis, but according to the June 2025 WHO report on social connection, they beg to differ. It is issuing a charge that says if we don't do something about this with the same urgency that we treat health and mental health and physical health, that this is going to continue to cause problems not only to us individually, but societally. And so, with these things in mind, what if today creative maladjustment looks a lot like connection? And if so, what can systemic therapists offer in terms of improving connections? I'm so glad you asked. Because when I look to kind of the bodies of work that help us understand systems and what it means to be well bonded and connected, one of the things we can know is that, yes, problems are systemic, but so are solutions. That these individual interactions make up a system, and the whole is greater than the sum of any individual part. Come on, MFTs, right? Is that our rallying cry, right? The whole is greater than the individual parts. And that also means that individual interactions also have influence over the whole. And so when I look in our canon, I find folks like Murray Bowen, who is considered the founder of family systems theories. And he talks about how the family is an emotional unit, and that we have less autonomy than we typically think on our own feelings and thoughts and emotions. And so during the time where he was talking about this, writing about this, thinking about this, he was seeing symptoms of folks who might have a differing view, a differing thought, a different feeling. He was seeing them become symptomatic because there was this pull, this draw into sameness as connection. And he came up with this term differentiation, which some of us may have even kind of heard of, whether it be through interaction with systems theory or with congregational life. That differentiation is something that helps us to understand what it means to have our own feelings and thoughts, even as we are a part of a whole. But remember when Bowen was doing his work? What was happening then, right? This is the question. How was the state of communities then? How connected were folks, right? We're talking about the mid-20th century when there weren't screens in every household or in every palm, let alone, right? Access to all these opinions at your fingertips was not accessible in the same way. All these varying thoughts, right, that we can look to big data to show us. And so at this time, being able to hold on to your own thoughts and feelings meant something really particular. But what I've been thinking about lately is this. Even though I was baptized in Bowen as a training pastoral psychotherapist, and I really appreciate all that Bowen theory has to offer us, I wonder if we need more differentiation today. Or might we need more bonding over the commonalities, the things that bind us together most as it relates to the common good? Perhaps what we need more of is the recognition, like another ancestor taught, of Ubuntu. That means that there is no me without we. And that I am because we are, and that we are intricately and inescapably interconnected. What if we invested a bit more in that direction? And there's already voices that are telling us within our systemic catalog that this matters, right? So we can look to attachment theory, which says that we are all wired for this interconnection, that we are wired to depend on each other, to be interdependent, in other words. Right? And so as you can see this photo that I show at risk of my ovaries catching on fire, these babies, right? Babies, right? We have this innate kind of need to be connected that starts at birth. We also see this in methods like Gottman, where John and Julie Gottman studied couple relationships over many decades and discovered that it's not in the big, sweeping, grand gestures that strong bonds are formed. That the difference between well-bonded and less so couples was in daily acts of turning towards, of acknowledgement, what they called micro moments, right? Eye contact, a smile, a recognition that something was said or done. And the classic example is bringing someone coffee before they've had a chance to make it themselves or even ask. Micro moments. Small flapping wings that seem insignificant, that make a huge impact in how we are bonded together. We also have EFT, or emotionally focused therapy, where Sue Johnson reminds us that We all need someone who has our back. We need somebody who we can call and they can call us and know that we can depend on them. That this is not weakness, that this is not immaturity, but this is what keeps us well and strongly bonded. Somatic therapies are not inherently systemic, but for me, very important because of the integration, right? In the very word soma, we hear the integration of mind, body, and spirit. And somatic practitioner Kelsey Blackwell talks about in her book, Decolonizing the Body, that we can often look within and reconnect with our own bodies to have wisdom when it comes to these kinds of things. That sometimes it is about unlearning and relearning what we need to be well, which colonialism and capitalism would much rather have us not, right? Be connected in that way. But what we know and what is signaled by the Sadinkra symbol of the Sankofa is that much of this is going back and getting it. We've got to go back and get what helps with strong communal bonds. Because most of us, right, these things didn't start in the 20th century with theories, right? But most of us in our lineage know that there are collective societies and indigenous communities and practices that we can draw from and recover as it relates to these things. We now have neuroscience that tells us that when we are strongly bonded and when we are in the presence of safe others, that we can relax. And that our nervous system begins to regulate and regain some of its elasticity. It's to say that we can't be mobilized all the time, just like we can't be in a calm state all the time. That's not realistic either. But that we need to co-regulate with safe others to be able to have that kind of resilience and flexibility that our nervous systems need. And as trauma specialist Bessel van der Kolk reminds us in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, the attachment system is stronger than the trauma system. So who is we? That's the creative part in creative maladjusting. And perhaps it's closer than you think. You can look within. Whose love do you already carry around you that liberates you, that empowers you, and that supports you? But then I want you to look up and look around. Who is your we? And how do you nourish and nurture those bonds? Right? Who is someone that you haven't called in a while that's part of your we that you can call and say, hey, I was just thinking about you? Who in your we have you not checked on to see, hey, want to grab a meal? You hungry? Right? That's important now more than ever. Who and how can you engage even your community in ways that say, I see you? What do you need? Right? Because Ubuntu theology says that we're all bound up together in our humanity. Attachment theory says that we are all wired for this kind of attachment and that we need it to survive. Gottman method says It's in the small, everyday acts, micro moments of care that build these bonds. EFT says we all need somebody that's got our back. And somatic therapies remind us of reconnecting with what we already know, an ancestral birthright that we can gather to clap together, sing together, stomp, whatever it is, right? That we know, that we do to strengthen those bonds. We can go back and get those practices too. Because maladjustment today, as I see it, is refusing to be disconnected and to be we to one another. And to end that cultivating, just like Mrs. Ortega did, we can reach for and create life against all odds anyway. Thank you.
Some time for questions. We have a few minutes.
Thank you so much for the talk, Dr. Davis. I'm wondering, I've been sitting here thinking about the notion of bad connections, and it seems like that can mean at least two different things. One would be like low quality connections, right? Like, oh, I have a bad connection on my phone, or I think a lot of what your talk was trying to address, the ways in which connections are diminished in our current age. But I'm wondering about another sense of bad connection, which is a connection that's strong, but towards bad ends. In other words, forces in society in which there is cohesion, there is connection, but towards goals that actually are detrimental to the common life. So I wonder if what you said about low quality connections would have anything to say about connections that, on the one hand, are strong, but the total impact of them in our social life is damaging. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think context matters, absolutely. You know, I was talking, just before this talk to someone about, in some ways, this being a love letter to those who are really working towards things that, in many ways, right, are good and about the common good, but are very difficult, right? And how we kind of sustain ourselves in this. And it applies, though, to both. It applies to everything in between in terms of what a collective, strong, bonded kind of impact that can have in whatever direction that energy is turned. And so I think, too, there's a part of what I've been thinking about that really urges many of us to, the key word is that common good, to be thinking about what are some of the trade-offs, if you will, when we prioritize that. Because if we only go on the side of differentiation, there's going to be nuance after nuance of what could be a better or kind of more improved, more perfect kind of direction and plan towards that common good. But what I'm sitting with a lot today is there's worse and there's worser, right? And if we can rally, I think, around the good in more cohesive ways, I think that we could make better strides towards that good. And so I hear what you're saying, and in some ways I'm offering this as something that it certainly applies both ways, but I think maybe, especially for those interested in the common good, we need to hear, especially at this time. So, yeah, I appreciate that question, though. Thank you.
Thank you. And so as you, Rachel Clark, MDiv student, as you bring about, like reintroduce some of us and introduce some of us to the other side of the other work that Dr. King was doing, the creative maladjustment, sometimes I think people need to hear, and even to name that, being maladjusted to this current situation, for lack of a better word, there are risks. And so a lot of times there are people who are not really, within themselves, are not really adjusted to it, but they're not brave enough to say so. And so if we name the fact that there are risks involved with being maladjusted to toxic connections, and then realize that we are more than we think we are. There are more of us who are sick with maladjustment, creative maladjustment, and we can be brave if we know that there are more of us.
I appreciate those comments, Rachel, and I think highlighting that there are risks, right, to creative maladjusting. There are risks to be in an environment where there is that kind of impact, that toxic impact, and be in relationships, right? The same thing applies. And so in even those realities, my hope, at least the way I'm thinking about this, is that being in these relationships that are well bonded and that are resilience building and healing helps mitigate. And, I want to hold that tension, right? Helps. Doesn't take it away, and I think that's important to name. It helps heal so that we can come back another day and kind of continue. It does all of these things, but it doesn't take away risk, and that's also true. Yeah. Thank you.
Let's take one more question.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I wonder if you can think out loud about, as much as you talked about some data that talks about the loneliness factor that is present in our society today. And it seems to me that on the one hand, there's lots of talk about community and togetherness and coming together. But then on the other hand, I look at statistics that talk about the increasing, I don't know if it began before the pandemic, but at least during and continuing, about loneliness in the many ways that we have created pathways to maintain that loneliness, really. And so I wonder if you can think out loud for me about how do you think that, as a people, we might navigate these realities of what data is showing, even though there is much more language about community and connection, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. That's the thing about kind of systems, is that they can begin to kind of reify, right? As these trends are emerging, I think that's wonderful how you put it. It's almost as though there are systems that are maintaining and kind of keeping the trend going at this point. And so what can we do if we really believe in the importance and the vitality of stronger communal relationships to kind of turn those around? And I would say that systems theory says that it does start with kind of what feels like interactional changes that are small. Systems theory would say, even in kind of our local spaces and the places of influence, that those can have some ripple effects. And I also think, ripple makes it seem like it's kind of like very smooth and like, beautiful, a rippling pool of water. But sometimes it may feel disruptive, right? To kind of show up in this way or refuse a particular kind of modality or process or system that doesn't feed those kinds of goods of connection. And so I think we're figuring some of this out. I'm trying to kind of think of some examples, but I do know, currently right now, we've got a program going on in my children's school where they're tracking the no-tech time that they spend, right, in favor of other activities, in-person activities. These are just really small things, but it makes me think about how systems are seeking to counteract, which I think is along your lines, like what can we do to move this other direction? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we leave, I just want to remind you of our reception in the lobby. So please join us, and there will be ample time to ask Dr. Davis here many other questions. You can always audit a course, or become an MTS or MDiv or MFT student. So before we also leave, I wanted to remind you to register for our next CTS talk on conspiracy theory by one of our own, Professor Rob Saylor, who is a conspiracy unto himself, on February 3rd, 2026 at 4:30 here in Shelton. Please join me once more in thanking Dr. Davis for her presentation.